Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Meyerson. For those of you who don't know me, I'll just kick off by introducing myself, and then I'll ask Fabian to do the same. And I'll share a little bit about what we'll be discussing today. So I run Heirloom. We're a brand strategy and identity firm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Do a lot of brand positioning work, brand architecture work, and naming. I wrote a book about naming called Brand Naming, which we may talk about a little bit today. I host a podcast called How Brands Are Built, which is also a blog. And then most recently, I have co-authored the latest edition of Designing Brand Identity, which I think really is sort of the impetus for this call. Fabian and I chat all the time. We've talked about previous books that he's written and that I've written, but Designing Brand Identity was something that kind of got us wanting to have this live chat. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about brand identity in general. We'll talk about some books and some products that Fabian has brought into the world as well. But Fabian, why don't you talk about that a little bit and introduce yourself?
Sounds good. I realized we're basically a complete mirror image of each other, not only because of the awkward promotion that that my designer designed, but we're like equal height and everyone knows Rob very, very tall. That was totally a design choice. No, but there is, it's amazing how we both do a lot of the same things. So in fact, we're actually direct competitors and I should actually head out of here. So bye. Rob, this is all you know.
Or I should.
Well, or you should, right? So basically, we both provide naming and identity services. We both run a podcast about brand creation. We both have books about branding on Amazon. So it's kind of crazy and really cool. I think that makes it so interesting to hear both of our opinions today. So I run a brand strategy and identity consultancy. We create clarity for brand transformations. I'm also a partner at Chameleon Collective, which is a brand transformation consultancy. Wrote books on branding, Bigger Than This, How to Launch a Brand. Run a podcast where I don't talk to marketers because I don't like talking to people that are exactly like myself besides Rob. So I talk to founders.
Special exception for me, thanks.
Very special. I talk to founders about how they actually created clarity for their own brand. So I talk to like the founder of Liquid Death and JetBlue Intelligencer, et cetera, et cetera. And that's pretty much it for intros, I think, because most of you know either Rob or myself or both of us. So one more housekeeping note I should mention. Rob named this session today in about like building and launching successful brands in 2024 and what does it take. And of course we're gonna have that as the carrot until the very end. So at the very end, we will both kind of reveal like right now for us, what is that big thing that we think is the biggest advice that we can give. So just stick around to the end for that. But with that being said, and while I have the mic, let me start interrogating you, Rob, because I know this is going to go both ways.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that subject though, about 2024, branding in 2024. You wrote a book about brand identity. Right now, it just got released. In your mind, like what changed? Especially it's the 6th edition now of a book. Like what changed in brand identity? What is the state of brand identity in 2024?
Yeah, I think the fact, as you put it, the fact that this is the 6th edition of a classic book, which we should mention right off the bat that this is Alina Wheeler's book. Alina Wheeler wrote Designing Brand Identity in 2003. She created 5 more editions of it, including this one, which I just came on board to co-author with her. But I think the fact, the state of brand identity right now is sort of encapsulated in that fact that it's the 6th edition of a classic, because a lot of the basics still ring true. That's the reason this book has lived as long as it has. And of course, it has changed dramatically since 2003, but also many of the topics that are in it and some of the just basic definitions and descriptions of those topics still hold true. But we also need to create new editions of this book every 3 to 5 years, or Lena did. And I've helped with this one because so much has changed also. I mean, since the first edition, back in 2003, we didn't have iPhones. Social media has exploded since then. Everything that's happened in just the world, the pandemic, social change, cultural change, brands, it may feel like, well, what does that have to do with brands? On one level, you can sort of separate those in your mind. But of course, brands have to react to that, whether they like it or not. And brands can even help drive some of that in some maybe very special cases where brands kind of drive or take a front seat in cultural changes. And so there is a whole section of this book called Brand Dynamics that has to do with some of those trends, social justice, AI, new digital interfaces. And because we all need to react to these and brands need to react to them, I think it's important to stay up to date. And so that's sort of the state of brand identity today, I think. But I mean, you're an expert on this topic as well. As you mentioned, we do a lot of the same things. So what do you think is changing? What do you feel like is the state of brand identity?
It's a crazy state right now. It's like I feel like in the last 6 to 12 months with AI being really introduced to the masses, I think everything is in flux. So to me, it's a hard question to answer because first there was Adobe and Photoshop, and that completely changed how brand identity was created and, how the entire industry worked. Then it was Fiverr and a fast slope downhill. And now it's AI. And I really feel like what is happening because of all of these tools, and I can also attest to that myself, because now that I'm driving my own little, startup hardware brand, I'm doing things differently than I would have advised my clients, which is interesting, right? So I see that everything is more fluid. I feel like that a brand's overall identity, so less the name and the logo, but really the overall vibe, right? I feel like it is becoming ever more fluid. It is constantly kind of like adjusting a little bit. And I think that's kind of great. I think brands and brand identity itself will start to take itself less seriously. And I think that's a great thing as long as it is within some sort of guide rails. Because if this is going out of any guardrails, sorry, it's going to be a hot mess, right? But I love that idea that brands are consistently kind of like changing their look a little bit and moving forwards, but the foundations of how a brand, how a name is crafted, how a brand is crafted, how an identity is shaped, that very much stays the same. And I think that that's the idea of why there is a 6th edition of Designing Brand Identity, because it's this age-old saying, you need to know the rules in order to break them, right? And I think now we are going to very quickly identify the brands that don't know the rules and the intern in AI is running it, right? Versus the brands that actually know those foundational rules, which I guess, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just saw I don't know if you saw this. Somebody posted on LinkedIn the other day, and I don't want to call people out, but I didn't read the full post, so maybe there was more to it than I thought there was. But it said, "Why have one logo when you can have 20?" And my immediate reaction was, because you don't want 20. Now, 20, to your point, 20 variations on a very distinctive, clear logo sort of idea. Because there was also a recent post by I'm going to forget his name, but he's a big Instagram influencer. I feel bad forgetting his name, who does a lot of like Photoshop and Illustrator kind of tips and tools. And he just showed off how Adobe Firefly can help you create these really cool interpretations and iterations of your logo. And sort of like MTV did back in the 90s, where they had, and that I think is cool, right? That's a way to kind of flex your identity that I think is, and that's using AI. And I think that's similar to what you're talking about. Whereas having 20 very different logos, that's where you start to veer off kind of some of the fundamentals of just like yeah, you want to be recognizable.
I think this is a super interesting conversation. I would love everyone to jump in the comments too, right? Because this is pretty juicy. I feel like brands that I really loved back when I was growing up, which of course is 5 years ago, like Burton snowboards, right? Burton had this thing where literally every season they came out with all kinds of new logos, like new ideas of how the logo can work. And to me, that was kind of like the skate, snowboard, kind of like attitude where you're not corporate. And so I think that, again, it's rooted in brand strategy. There are brands where
Right.
that idea of, Marty Neumeier's zigzag, right? Like that idea of like, oh, well, if corporate goes this way, why don't we have 20 logos? Because our tribe doesn't care about that, because as long as the logos all have some similarity in attitude, it can be amazing. But I think
Yeah.
Because now we have those tools, like we had the tools like Photoshop, there's going to be a crazy amount of stuff happening in the next couple of years of like, how will brands take this? Well, that said, talking about, those guardrails, let's go back to your book for a little longer here. This is the first time, I believe, that Alina had a co-author for her book. Why you? Why not me? No, no. Why? Like, how did you the joke? How were you chosen, and how did you take this on? And it must have been a massive undertaking.
It's a great question. I think not you, simply because Alina hadn't met you, and I made sure that didn't happen. I kept you a secret. No, I mean, I didn't think it would be me either. Alina and I met because I interviewed her for my podcast years ago, and we hit it off, I guess you could say, and sort of became fast friends and kept in touch. But I think that has a lot to do just with Alina's personality, which we can talk about as well. But she was just the friendliest, most down to earth person for all these sort of heroes of mine that I got to interview on the podcast. She is one of those people who is just, so sort of kind and generous, and does not come off as kind of a guru that's up on a mountaintop somewhere that's untouchable. She's very kind of just a real person. And so she stayed in touch with me, and we talked a lot about work, what I was doing. When I wrote my book, Brand Naming, I asked her if she would write the foreword for it. And she did that. And I think that was a big milestone in that we got to write together, edit each other. She looked at my book, I looked at her foreword, and we gave comments back and forth to each other. And I think that's when she probably started to get the idea that I might be a good partner on this. She did know years ago when I interviewed her that she was going to be stepping away from designing brand identity. The way she told it, her husband gave her an ultimatum that it was either him or the book. As you can imagine, this book was a huge part of her life. And I think, he was ready for her to spend a little more time enjoying the golden years and spending time with him, which, they were such a fun couple, and spent a lot of time with friends and family. And so she was able to take a step back a little bit just by having me as a co-author and not being the sole person who this edition, it wasn't solely on her shoulders. But yeah, in terms of why me, the way she put it, and this is in the introduction to the 6th edition, she wrote a little blurb about this. We each answered 3 kind of big questions about the new edition and about designing brand identity. And one of hers was essentially why me? And it kind of came down to 2 things. She wanted somebody whose head was in this space in sort of a deeper way than just, all of us are practitioners or strategists or designers or namers, but somebody who kind of thinks about it on a day-to-day basis. And so the fact that she liked the fact that I had a lot of different roles, both client side and agency side, that I'd done it in the US, but also Asia. So I brought some of that kind of cultural awareness to it, which is really important to her and to me. And the fact that I have a podcast and was writing a book about naming just gave her this sense that I like talking about this stuff. I like thinking about this stuff. And to do a book like this, you have to kind of have that mindset or you're going to burn out on it quickly. So I think those two things combined, that I was sort of in the space in more than just a superficial way, and that she felt I would commit to creating the best possible version of this book, just having seen my work and seen the amount of work that I put into things like the podcast and the book. I think that was it. But I should note one thing. It also wasn't just me. She was fond of saying no one does it alone. You'll see that in the book. You'll see that in pretty much every edition of the book. This is a huge team of collaborators, most significantly Robin Goffman, who's the creative director on the book. I'm not a designer. She helped lay out every page. She was a real partner in this as well. And then, of course, the publishing team, the editor, and everybody else, and lots of people who contributed content. So it's not a solo effort. It's not even an effort of just me and Alina, but a team. So a lot of people to thank, and we do thank them in the book.
And Rob, sorry. One thing, some listeners might not know, but sadly, Alina passed away, and so it is pretty hard for Rob to talk about this. I noticed this right now. Right, it's not the easiest of things, but it is joyful because it's in remembrance. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that. And you were the perfect person to do this for so many reasons. As you know, I'm really busy these days with running two companies, which one was already enough. But I did get enough chance to go through the book to very quickly understand why this was the perfect pair, and I think everyone should be very, very excited diving into it.
Thank you for saying that. And when she asked me, and also I didn't immediately say yes, believe it or not, which feels kind of crazy now because it's been such a huge honor and such an amazing experience and opportunity. But when she first came to me, I sort of, like you just said, I felt like, man, I've written a book before. I know how much work that takes. I have young kids. I'm running a business. I just wasn't sure I could get on board for something that felt so overwhelming, and it was overwhelming in a lot of ways. But we talked about it a lot. She was very transparent about kind of the pros and cons of doing something like this. Having Robin involved, both as a point of continuity, but also as just someone who I could really lean on to help with it, was made a huge difference. And so, in the end, I was just too excited to have that opportunity to learn from Alina, to work closely with her, to talk to branding professionals all over the world, find out what they're doing, and just kind of, look at their work and get their work into the book. So it's an honor, and very bittersweet launching this book. We really had hoped that Alina would be here to promote it with me. The happy news on that front is that she was able to see this through to completion. She saw the digital, the PDF copies of the final pages as they went to the publisher. The only change we made after she passed away was adding a tribute to her at the front of the book as quickly as we could. It was like already on the way to the printer, unfortunately, when she passed away. So it's sad that she never got to hold it in her hands, but I take some solace in just the fact that she knew it was done, and she loved, everything in this edition. She contributed everything in this edition. She's the kind of person who has, it's almost like maybe she shouldn't have been, but she was down to the last, few months, like giving feedback on pages in this book. So it has her fingerprints all over it, and it's such a better product and book as a result of that. It was a true collaboration, and she got to see that it was done and got to know that it was done, and that there would be a 6th edition, and that there was a team, not just me, but a team of people that were committed to carrying this legacy forward.
And I mean, the book, for those of you who don't know about the book, I mean, it is it is really a brand classic. I mean, for me, it was such a staple for when we started writing how to launch a brand. And back in the beginning, it was really we, because it was more of like, hey, this is how brands should be launched. And so really going, not trying to innovate how brands are launched, but for our way, like these are the steps that we really think are important. We leaned heavily on I don't know what edition it was of a Linus book, right? I quote, in How to Launch a Brand, the naming section, the different types of brand names came straight from designing brand identity, of course, with credits, and we mentioned it that we take it right from that book, right? So it really, like, the influence that she had on not just me, like in the practice, but everyone in the design world, is unbelievable. And it is wonderful that you were able to kind of carry not the full torch, right? But you carry it over right now with being able to have that book out there. So, bravo. And I know that in the book, in the very back, you say, Alina's warned me that this will be much more work than you could ever imagine, and it was even more than that, right? So I know it was a lot of you put into it.
It was more work than I imagined, but also more rewarding than I could have imagined. So, so I underestimated on both counts.
Let's talk a little bit more about that process, right? Like how was it creating a new edition? Like, how did you kind of like read through the last edition and adding to it? Where do you start? What are the hardest parts?
Yeah, well, you've written, multiple great books. I'm looking at them up on my shelf here. And How to Launch a Brand, I imagine, like my naming book, it's to some degree, it's sort of a dump of your own brain onto the page, right? And it's mostly words. So it's a lot of just kind of prose and writing and editing your own writing and getting feedback on your writing. This book was very different. And maybe, I wonder if any of your books were like this, but this was kind of going outside of myself and collecting a bunch of good content from other people, whether those are case studies or just there are topics in this book that frankly I don't know. I either don't know anything about or I'm not an expert on. And so we really wanted to get experts. If I'm writing about typography, I want someone who knows typography. Even if I'm editing a page about typography, I want an expert. And so for that, we went to James Edmondson of Oh No Typeco and just said, hey, look at these 2 pages about typography. Is there anything on here that you would change? Is there anything that you would add? Any newer, fresher examples that you would add? And that was a lot of the process, was kind of getting in touch with experts, getting in touch with the agencies, getting their work into the book, getting better examples of things into the book. And that made it really different from sort of writing a book.
Yeah. It's and I mean, I would get such panic attacks and anxiety over the idea of having, thousands of logos and other people's work and photography and everything in this book. I mean, this book is like filled with case studies and examples, which makes it so amazing and so rich, right? But how do you not wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, wait, did I give the right person credit, or did we forget about this, or this happened last minute, or we miscredited someone? Like, this must be very stressful.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. I'll probably not be able to sleep tonight because of this question.
No problem.
No, I mean,
the
answer is I probably did. Have a lot of that. I think. I'm going to pull this down here because I think, is this the one? Holding Fabian's book bigger than this. Is this the one where you go? It's like, I think it's like 5 or 6 case studies about.
Yeah.
With that great fishing company, right? I love this book's great, by the way, for anyone who has not checked it out and wants like really sort of in-depth case studies and explanations of how businesses build great brands. So you had to do a little of that, I assume, right?
Kind of, not really. No, no. I mean, seriously, like because really all I did I just talked about what these companies do in the way
which I
that I
guess,
see it, right? So I didn't include images, I didn't include quotes from their CEOs, and if so, I credited them to Forbes or wherever I saw the quote. So in a way, it was kind of like a cop-out situation, because
no.
I have so much anxiety about that. I'm like, oh my God,
No,
they're
it's a
gonna
great
come
point.
after me.
I mean, I learned so much about this, and I'm not a lawyer, so don't anyone take away from this that I'm giving you sort of the final word on it. But yeah, we could quote people, especially if we're pulling it from an article. We could do that without permission. Although Alina really liked to ask permission anyway, just as a courtesy. We could put logos in the book. I learned without really asking for permission, just to show a logo. Maybe not on the cover, but inside the book. If it's for educational purposes, we could do that. But for images, diagrams, anything like that, we needed written permission. Luckily, I had Alina, who had done this many times. The publisher had been involved in this many times. They had a form that we asked people to sign. But still, from a process standpoint, it was really hard. We had, I can't remember what it's called, but one of those like boards where you have like sticky notes or cards on it for each case study, for example, and really for each page of the book, where we would move them from left to right, from like haven't even looked at this one yet, all the way over to we have a signature, and we got them to send us a high-res image that we confirmed is the right resolution for printing.
Wow.
And in between all these steps of like, we're waiting for them to reply to our latest email.
And was that a physical board, or was it digital?
No, because it was digital.
I figured. Yeah,
we used Trello. Because we're spread all over the place, right? Robin's based in New Jersey. I'm out here in California. We had other people involved in other places. Alina was in Philadelphia most of the time. And
because Alina had these boards like back in the day. I see the pictures in there. That's why I asked, because she literally, I mean, that book was a room of her life. It was pretty amazing.
Yes. Yeah, well, we did do that on our own. You may have seen a picture of me online with these printed spreads all over the floor of my office. Alina also was doing things like that, as was Robin. And then we did get together in Philadelphia and filled a coffee table, in her home with these spreads and marked them up and things like that. So we did a little of it physically. Alina liked to do that. I'll show, again, if you're listening to this, you won't be able to see it, but on the 5th edition, she sent me this really close to when we started. It's her 5th edition with just Sharpie all over it, throughout it. Get rid of this, get a new example here, keep this, I love it. Or, what do you think of this? And just throughout the whole book. And so that was kind of the starting point of like, okay, well, I guess I have to find a new example here, or, do I agree with her that this needs to stay or go? And let's talk about that. That was one of the jumping off points for this project.
Cool. I see that Mark is getting antsy in the comments here. He's like, how to publish a brand identity book or building and launching successful brands. Get on topic, guys. Way to go, Mark.
All right.
Well, I'm sure there are plenty of you out there that are interested in how we, how a book like this actually comes about. But to Mark's point, maybe we zoom out a little bit, overarchingly into the idea of writing books, and then slowly move into more brand identity talk. And please put your questions in here, just like Mark's. Shall we chat a little bit more about writing books, to his point, like how to publish a brand identity book? I think there are different ways of doing that. Obviously, what Rob just did is a massive undertaking, which is very different from how you would usually go about writing a brand identity book, because it's a 6th edition. It's like the Bible, basically. Rob, you wrote a book about naming not too long ago, which is brand identity. It is part of brand identity. Do you want to take the question for a second? I know it's a big question.
Well, I'm reading Mark's comment as stop talking about how to publish a book, but I will answer
with how to publish a brand. Or building and launching success. Okay, let's get on. Okay, let's move over. No more writing books talk. Even though you and I have so much to talk.
Yes,
about.
and we can come back to that if anyone does questions about it because, yeah, both of us have done that. So please do add questions about that or anything else that you want us to speak to.
Cool.
But yeah, why don't we jump to launching a brand? So we don't want to give away our ending because we have we have some thoughts there that we'll share. But I want to ask you, Fabian, your book, How to Launch a Brand. How long ago now did that come out?
That's a mighty long time ago. I have no idea. 9 years, 10 years, a decade.
I thought about 10 years.
Yeah.
About 10 years. Well, let's do this. I wanted to ask you about that and then also this brand Tone Optic that you've launched. So maybe you can tell us and tell everyone about launching a brand, but in the context of now you've actually done it with a real physical product that you've created. So I guess just for the listeners, Tone Optic is, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's a rotating way of displaying and storing your vinyl records in your home. So correct me on that. How do you describe Tone Optic?
That's good.
Yeah, what was the process of creating that brand and launching it?
Well, it's a strange kind of niche brand, right? But it is fascinating for me to see how I rethink how brands are launched and how the process goes when I'm in the first person experiencing it, right? So Tone Optic is a niche product. It's basically, records, vinyl records are back. People love them. I have over 2,000 of them. I always like them, right? So you basically store them on the wall, just like books, right? So you've got your library and you've got your record collection. The problem is you can't find anything because all you see is these tiny spines. So not like book spines that you can read. Record spines, most of them are tiny. They're worn out, especially the older ones. And so during the pandemic, I had more time to listen to music, and I realized I listened to the same 10 records over and over because they have big fat spines and they're like in color and whatever, right? And so it brought back an idea that I sketched down a long time ago, like we all do. We sketch down like tons of ideas of like, wouldn't that be cool? And wouldn't that be cool? And we never do anything about it. And the idea was that I could just pull out these records from the shelf, from the nice library, pull them out. It rotates towards me. I can flip through them like in a record shop and then push them back in, and they're still library style. So that was the idea. Mm-hmm. And then the silly thing is I actually asked someone, how difficult would that be to create? And that was my biggest problem because from there on, it was a slippery road because the next thing I know is I pay money for someone to start thinking about it, and one thing leads to another. And here we are, like 3 years later, and I'm producing them and selling them. But it was really an exercise of form and function, and bringing this together. And I know, Rob, you mentioned on LinkedIn that it was in Design Milk. It was actually the #1 post in home furnishing and Design Milk in 2022, which is insane because the product didn't really exist yet. And I was competing with all the big furnishing companies. So it was really, really cool. But
I'm so jealous. Design Milk is such a cool blog for
huge
interior design. And so that's awesome.
It was amazing for me, for someone who's not a product designer, to get that, because it was just absolutely amazing. But thinking about from a branding perspective, launching this brand, the branding part was so easy because obviously I do it day in, day out. Right. Like, I mean, that's what I do. So the brand strategy I did on a flight to Europe. I remember that I used my own Kool-Aid and did my Resonate workshop and I went through that. The name came very easily to, everything kind of fell in place. What was really hard was everything else. And it was the hardest, not even the implementation of the brand. It was just running a hardware startup, producing a product, mass producing, shipping a product. Like that part, the manufacturing and the design and the going through all these hoops was so stressful. I tell you, it was the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life. And I thought it would be easy because, hey, it's D2C. Just get a product and put it online, Shopify. It's all easy. But it was extremely stressful.
I definitely want to hear about that and what the maybe unexpected stressors were. But going back just to the strategy that you did on a plane and everything, you said you drank your own Kool-Aid, but like my experience, it's actually hard to do that because you're the client all of a sudden, and you realize how tough it is to make some of these decisions. And it's going to reflect on you whether you get the strategy right and the identity right. So was there anything from that you took away that you might do differently with clients going forward, even if it's just kind of the empathy of like, I know this is a tough decision for you?
Well, all of the above. I mean, first of all, yes, I felt extremely vulnerable and exposed creating my own brand. That I'm the guy who wrote the book How to Launch a Brand, and I'm telling people how to do it. And here I am,
Yeah.
like kind of like either failing or making it in front of everyone, right? And we had a Kickstarter campaign, and the Kickstarter, and when it's really me, but it's like I have a team of people that helps me too, like Florian and Jesse and tons of other people. But we had a Kickstarter campaign and it totally didn't make it. It totally didn't get to that goal. And it was so stressful because I'm like exposed, right? So, but a lot of that is ego and you just get over it. But from a brand perspective, now that we are flourishing and things are great and things are looking very, very positive, it definitely goes back to what I said in the very beginning of this, that I used to be, here's the style guide, here's the rules, and here's how we are going to be for like the first couple of years to make sure people know how this brand behaves online, what the colors are, what the fonts are, etc. But sure enough, like 6 months in, Jesse, my creative director, is like putting a different font in there, and I'm like, Jesse, what's up? Why is the font different and why is the color slightly different? And she's like, yeah, it's more the vibe right now. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. It's more the vibe right now because it's so true, right? And I'm like, oh my God, you're so right. It's more the vibe right now. This is more us now. And so what I learned with all these crazy founders that are constantly like, oh, let's change this. And it drives us brand people crazy.
Yeah.
To a certain
You would
extent.
roll your eyes probably in the past,
yes.
right?
But I mean, we didn't pivot. We weren't like, we're gold and then we're hot green, right? It wasn't like that, but it was just kind of like, hey, let's go sans serif and let's go a little bit more like darker on the color or lighter. But it's that kind of stuff where as you put content out and as you get feedback from people and as you start seeing your audience slightly skew younger or this way or that way, you start changing things, right? And I think it's a healthy thing. And I think brands should be doing that more. And so I think that these like style guides, they should constantly start evolving and they should have wiggle room and playfulness to it, where it's like, hey, these are the things we're never going to change, at least for the next couple of years. But here, go and play. Go have fun. Don't be stale. And so that's something that I learned. And so when I work with founders now and with companies, it is definitely more like, here are the suggestions. Now fly. Now make it to be organic and let's touch base in 2 months, see where you're going, right? So that was hugely different for me.
Yeah, I think absolutely agree. That's been my experience. I haven't launched a product brand, but just in sort of trying to build my own brands around my agency or the podcast, you start experimenting a little bit. And I think the experimentation is something that healthy brands do, and you need to allow a little bit of room for it. That's how you figure out what the vibe is sometimes. You try something a little different and it sort of blows up on social media or something like that. And you realize, oh, maybe we need to be doing a little more of that, or it just feels right. And so I completely agree that there's got to be this balance between that's kind of classic rigidity of the brand guidelines that, will be like this for 10 years until we hire Pentagram to redesign the logo. No, I think it needs to be a lot more flexible, allow for some experimentation. And some of the best brands out there, some of the biggest brands out there, and this goes back to something you said at the very beginning, Fabian, is there's kind of this increase, I think, in everything being in a little bit of a state of flux, the fluidity of a brand. And it's like it's got this core that stays true. It never feels like it's a completely different brand if you're doing it right. But it does feel like it's alive. Like it's not just showing up identically every single time.
And that is easy when you're a small company like Tone Optic, where it's really more solopreneur stuff in the beginning, right? And you can kind of like fly by the seat of your pants, and you can do that because it still feels right and it feels on brand. But it gets interesting of what happens when you have a team and what happens when you're a couple hundred people company. How do you keep this kind of intrinsic fluidity going? And that's when things like the book, come back into the game.
Yeah, I should mention we have these ideals in the book, sort of the principles that we think every strong brand should strive for. Things like authenticity, and two of them are coherence and flexibility, and they're right next to each other, and they seem like contradictions, but I think it's exactly what we're talking about. It's this tension between having some uh, recognizability over time across countries, across different people, across co-branding partnerships. Your brand is hopefully growing and doing lots of different things in lots of different places, but it has to be similar enough that people recognize it everywhere they see it. Um, and so there's that flexibility as well. That's really critical, and that's why they're both in there. I want to ask now. Let's get back to the unexpected difficulty of running a product company. What were some of the things that you didn't expect that were like tougher than you thought they would be? And are there any, like, what are some stories of things that went wrong, and how did you course correct?
Everything went wrong, Rob. I mean, this could take 2 hours, and then I know Mark is going to jump in and say, "Fabian, you're talking about Tonoptic too much," and I don't want no trouble with Mark. No, no. I mean, everything is difficult when you run a hardware startup. They say in the industry, now that I'm in it, right, hardware is hard, right? There's a reason for it. So, I mean, just the production, every single detail can go wrong, and it will go wrong, right? But it's also things good things that completely change your day, right? I remember I was about to go on vacation to Portugal, and then right before I shut down my computer and say I'm going to go offline for a little bit, someone sent me a tweet. What do they call them now? An X, whatever, silly stuff, but like a tweet, a formerly known tweet.
It was a tweet at the time.
Yeah. It was a tweet at the time. I like that. That's almost romantic, right? It was a tweet at the time of my storage unit doing its thing, because it's kind of sexy the way that it does that, and it's perfect for social. And within him posting it, and I didn't know that person, and he just knew that I'm not aware of it. Within like 12 hours, it had 1 million views. And it's insane, right? And so this thing started blowing up like crazy. The only problem was that they didn't mention my product name. So I basically spent the entire night before I went on vacation with my wife online replying to every one of the thousands of comments, with Tonoptic, to make sure that they know what that is, right? But it's things like that you don't think about, right? And or shipping, you put something in a box and you protect it well, and then you don't realize that there's a mechanism within your product that when it gets shipped at a certain level, that it actually starts, just being off 1 millimeter, and it's stuff like that. But there's tons of cool stories. I'm actually writing a book now about it, because I figured, if anything, I get a book out of it, right? So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing now with all kinds of
how I launched a brand.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to have it co-authored by Rob Meyerson to have a different viewpoint.
Tonoptic, you've mentioned the name a few times, and I should say, go to tonoptic.com if you're watching this, because you do have to see this product to kind of get what it is, and the way that it moves is really sexy. So go take a look at it. But let's talk about the name. We've talked about naming a little bit, and I have a couple things I want to mention just about naming in general. But before we do that, tell me about that name. What was the process of coming up with it? Was it difficult? Why was
Rob,
that one selected?
I'm so glad someone finally asks me. Literally, no one asks about it, because it is
the
so
namer is going to ask about it.
No, I love it because it's so normal, right? The name feels almost uninspired because it's so normal, and I was so amazed that in the last 2-3 years, no one actually picked on it, right? So you have to know your audience, right? And with me, vinyl collectors, serious vinyl collectors who also have the funds to buy something like my product, they're usually 60-year-old men, right? I mean, that's kind of like what it is. That's my audience. They have their hi-fi rooms. They have the money to spend, the time to enjoy. I'm a startup with no background at all in hi-fi or like product or audio or vinyl in that sense, right? I wanted to come on and not sound like the cool, hip, fun, young company, but I wanted to sound like something that's basically like a boombox or like something that's been around forever. Like it almost sounds like an audio tape, right? Tone optic. Like it sounds like something that could have been around in the 70s or 80s. And tone is what is always what is sound, right? That's music. That's what it's always about. And then optic is the vision, right? So it's basically like David Bowie, who I very much appreciate. It's sound and vision, right? So it's like his song name, music and design. Those are the two things for anyone launching a brand, right? You have to think about, okay, right now you have this rotating record storage unit, but in the future, what else will you do with it, right? Like, where could the brand go? How can it have legs? And so by calling it Tone Optic, I know that it will always have to do with music, which is tone, and optic, which is design. So that's how the name came about.
I love the name, actually. It totally sounds like something that Don Draper would have been one of his clients, right? It's like got a mid-century modern feel to it that I think works perfectly, especially now that you've explained the audience, which, I'm not old enough, I guess. Maybe I'm not in your audience. I'm not a vinyl collector. But
you will be. Though.
I will
you
be.
Will be.
Give me 10 years. But yeah, no. Thinking about
Mark is, and Mark, by the way, I appreciate your nice comments about it. Yes, buy the product.
Yeah. That's cool. So, and by the way, you mentioned David Bowie. Just such a funny coincidence. Anyone who knows Alina Wheeler will know that she was a huge David Bowie fan. One of her heroes. She gave an entire talk that you can still find on YouTube, all about David Bowie. It was about branding.
Oh, amazing!
But it's also about David Bowie.
I'm gonna watch that. Which I am not surprised. I'm not surprised that she was a big fan of his. And from a branding perspective, when you look at him and what he pulled off, right?
It's exactly what
it's like way before Prince.
Yeah, and it's kind of what we've been talking about. He was always David Bowie, but he reinvented himself so many times throughout his career. So it's really that it's that dichotomy again. I was going to say, just on naming, it's something, given my background, that I looked at pretty closely in this book. You mentioned the name types that were mentioned in Designing Brand Identity when you looked at it for your book, How to Launch a Brand. That we may have updated it or added to it a little bit, because that was just one of the first things for me to go in and say, well, how would I take everything from my book and take the best parts and get it onto these 2 pages? And so I definitely have.
And you only see, that's the thing. I looked at this, Rob.
2 pages.
Like it's one spread for each part of the branding process in the book, right? And looking at, here's Rob, Mr. Naming, and he gets a spread.
Yeah.
Which of course has lots of white space, so you can't really fill it with info.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And how what changed? So I know that the types of brand names changed even when we wrote How to Launch a Brand, and I say we because it really was an effort in the beginning. We actually pulled a new type of name. Back then, I think it was the numeric name, right? Like 409, Formula 409, right? We added that to the mix. I know now when we work with clients, we added another 1 or 2 into the mix. So things are always fluid. How did you update the naming section? Because I know that this is on topic and a lot of people are interested in it.
So there's a chart that I like to use that talks about the different types of names on sort of 2 axes. So anyone that's familiar with my work will be familiar with this, or even if you're not familiar with my work, because I can't claim to have invented it, but it talks about names in terms of how descriptive or abstract they are. This range from names like the Container Store, which is a store that sells containers, or Whole Foods, which sells food, so it's pretty descriptive, all the way out there to things like Virgin and Apple, where this has nothing to do with the products directly. And then the other axis on it is the type of word. So this is where you would get into numbers, for example, is one type, but much more common are real English words or completely invented words like Altria, and then the compounds where they take 2 words like tone and optic and smush them together. Those are kind of the 3 main types.
Smushed. They were neatly placed together
seamlessly. Exactly.
Good point.
Seamlessly connected.
There are others as well. And maybe some of the things you're talking about are, there are founders' names. There are brands that are named after their place of origin. I would just call those descriptive real word names. They're just sort of a subtype of that. And there are lots of other ways of thinking about names, but I think that breakdown really helps kind of orient you in the space of all the different types of names you could come up with.
For anyone who hasn't seen that chart, and I'm sure, Rob, you also had it in your naming book, but that is a chart that if you don't mind sharing it afterwards, maybe in the comment section, or a link to where people can find it, that is it's really great, because that way it's not here are the 7 or 8 or 12 different types, but it's kind of like more where do you
exactly. Yeah, if you Google how many, what are the different types of names, you will find a lot of those posts. Unfortunately, my SEO is not good enough to take over all of those posts that claim that there are exactly X types of names. And that kind of thinking, not only for naming, but anything really in marketing that claims to be that sort of precise and absolute about, there are 3 ways to position your brand, or there are exactly this many archetypes, or whatever it is. I'm always kind of like, I think it's probably more nuanced than that. And naming definitely is.
It goes back to the fluidity, right? Okay, so 5 minutes left. You titled the live stream "Building and Launching Successful Brands."
Yes.
What is your current answer? Because I know it changes every week, every month, every year for us. At least for me, it would, right? Because there's so many things that go, that can go wrong.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk.
What makes it?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways I could answer this, and I do want to mention. I mean, some of the updates we made to this book were to get some of that thinking into the book. Some of the things that have changed are not necessarily things, but we have new experts and new points of view. And so in this edition, for the first time, we have a spread on evidence-based marketing, which many of you may know as sort of How Brands Grow, or the Aaron Berg Bass Institute way of thinking about building strong brands, which you can either adopt wholeheartedly, or just, even if you don't, you can, I think, acknowledge that it has impacted the way we think about brands. And if you're not familiar with those books or that way of thinking, then I encourage you to look into it, which you can do by buying Designing Brand Identity and looking at that 2-page spread.
Well played, Rob.
Yeah.
Well played. Here's the marketer.
Yeah. We have Mark Ritson quoted in this book for the first time about brand strategy. We have David Ocker's model, his brand vision framework in the book. It wasn't in there before, although he, of course, was quoted in the book before. So there is some, well, that's not new, but there is some new and developing and sort of different perspectives on how to build strong brands that we try to cover in the book. The thing that I want to talk about, though, to answer your question, that's kind of top of mind, I should say that James Barnard is the influencer that I mentioned earlier, who shares these incredible tips.
Okay.
He's got like 500,000 followers on Instagram, so it's shame on me for forgetting the name. There's a different James, also very influential on social media, another designer, James Martin, Made by James. He has a great book out now about logo design. He posted something the other day that got me thinking. He posted this idea that you can't sell what you don't do. And his point was that a lot of brand strategists seem to not have their own strategy. Logo designers don't even have a logo. That, and to use his words, he said, the internet is like the wild, wild west when it comes to creative services. And it amazes me how many people talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. So I think that's a really good point. All of us, and Fabian, it's so refreshing and great to hear that you used your own process to build the Tone Optic brand, and it worked. You weren't like, oh God, I need to completely change how I do this now. It's been proven by all of your clients, but of course, I think it's different when you experience it yourself. But I replied with a joke, which it wasn't a joke, half jokingly, that I've been, and maybe many of our listeners have been at agencies where, unfortunately, it's more like try to sell whatever you can and then figure out how to do it after the fact. I've literally had bosses who I'd be in the pitch and the client would say, can you do XYZ? And they would say, sure. And then after the meeting, they'd turn to me and say, go figure out how to do it. It's the worst. It's unethical.
Yep.
But it got us into this kind of debate about And I think this is really relevant, especially because a lot of us who are building our own brands, are thinking about branding from the perspective of professional services, and maybe we're solopreneurs or small agencies. I do think there's a balance to strike between sort of trying to what people call niche down and say, like, I am a specialist in just this one thing. It's great if you can have a real depth of expertise in something, but I do want to. There's a counterbalance to that, which is to not be overly narrow. I think I've seen people out there who say, like, we only do branding for this one very specific niche industry, and I mean, more power to them if that's working. But I feel like that's probably overly limiting, and you want to be able to provide your services to a lot of different industries. And I think it's okay to have kind of a periphery on what you offer and say, this gets a little bit out, like, what are the edges of what you offer, and are those places where you can collaborate with people to provide more value for your clients? So I don't do web design, I don't do web development through Heirloom, but if we're designing a visual identity and we want to show what that's going to look like on a website, of course we're going to be able to help you find a developer, and we can work with that developer to create that website and make it real. And so that's kind of my most recent thinking, is this debate between niche down versus go as broad as you can, is to kind of think really carefully. And two takeaways from that are: build your network. I think especially for us small guys in the agency space, it's so important to get on live streams like this and listen and meet people and go to live in person events, stay active online, and just know people who do the things that you can't do, and figure out ways to collaborate with them potentially. And then I think it's just about honesty and transparency. I feel like there's been a little bit of a shift in work culture since the pandemic, and I feel like now more than ever, I'm just talking to clients really directly about, like, that's not something I do. I've never done that before. If you want me to try to do that for you, maybe we can figure out a way to do it. But I'll be bringing in this partner that I've worked with before, and they're going to kind of lead this. Just have that super candid conversation with the client, and be honest and provide value where you can.
And Rob, this is exactly why I joined the Chameleon Collective, because we're 110 specialists, right? And we work in teams, right? So if they need a brand strategist or a namer, like, they put me into the team, and vice versa, right? So I think that whole idea of, like, how the agency model is broken can be a whole different live stream. I know we're past the hour too. I'm gonna finish it off real quick with my thoughts on and just go a couple minutes over. I do have a call right now, but I texted that person. So basically, for me, what I learned, this is not so much about this is more about launching a brand rather than building a brand, right? Which I think is great. Rob, you went into building, I go into launching. So yes, branding is key, of course, right? But you have to know what you don't know, right? So if you're launching a brand, if you're there actually and it's your company, if you don't know branding, right, you need a specialist. Exactly what you said. For me at Tone Optic, I didn't know the audio industry at all. I went into a complete new industry. I didn't know anything about manufacturing at all. And I was now manufacturing a product, right? So what I did very early on is I started a board of advisors. And an advisory board sounds so fancy, but it's really a couple of highly capable people helping you, right? So I actually have the founder of Hydro Flask on it, who I have an advisory call starting a minute ago, and I just texted him. But so, it's like the founder of Hydro Flask, who knows manufacturing in and out, right? I have the founder of Cambridge Audio, who knows the audio world in and out, right? And I have these people on my advisory board. I have, like, with some of them, like Travis, I have a weekly call. With some of them, I have a monthly call. And they just help me navigate. And I feel supported by that. And an advisory board doesn't need to cost money. It doesn't even need to cost stock options. Right. Neither of the two I have with Tone Optic right now, right? So with them, it's basically like colleagues, right? Like I advise on brand, I advise on that strategy, and they advise on manufacturing or advise on the industry. So I think that idea that when you launch a brand, that you have the people that know what you don't know along the ride, may it be experts you hire or may it be a board of advisors. That is my biggest thing that I did right with Tone Optic.
That's huge.
So I leave it right there because I know we all have to jam. But we didn't get many questions. If there are any questions that we didn't see, I'm sure, Rob, you and I can jump in to is this going to be on LinkedIn too? We can actually
this will be on
okay.
Well, I'm not the technical expert on the questions, but I'll stick around. If you have to jump, I'll try to answer some now and make sure we collect everything here. Great point on finding people to support you, and I just want to thank you, Fabian, for joining me here today, for supporting me on this book, and everybody else who's dialed in and is watching and supporting us. So thanks everybody for making the time.
Absolutely. It was awesome, Rob. I appreciate it. See everyone. Bye.
Thanks again for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you like this episode, please leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, Inc. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time.